The words hit me so hard I almost dropped the serving tray. Get out of this house. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. The dining room fell silent. Crystal glasses caught the warm glow of the chandelier. Silverware rested neatly beside imported china. The smell of rosemary lamb still floated through the room I'd spent all afternoon preparing. My son didn't blink. I said, he repeated, slower this time, get out. His wife sat beside him, swirling expensive wine inside a crystal glass, as though this was simply another awkward family conversation. She didn't defend me. She smiled. Not a wide smile, just enough. The kind that tells you someone has been waiting a very long time to watch you fall. Around the table sat 12 guests. Business partners, neighbours, friends. People who had watched my son grow from a frightened little boy into the CEO he proudly called himself today. Not one of them spoke. My grandson looked at me from across the table, confusion filling his small eyes. "Dad," he whispered. "Stay out of this," my son snapped. Then he turned back toward me. "You've embarrassed me enough." I stared at him. Embarrassed him? The woman who had worked 3 jobs after his father died. The woman who sold her wedding ring to pay his college tuition. The woman who skipped meals so he could eat. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "This house isn't yours anymore." My fingers tightened around the tray. "What are you talking about? It belongs to me now." A strange feeling crept into my stomach, cold, heavy, wrong. His wife leaned forward. "There are legal documents," she said sweetly. "You signed them last year." My heartbeat slowed. No, I hadn't. Or had I? My mind raced through countless papers I'd signed after my surgery: insurance, medical forms, tax documents, investment updates. Everything had blurred together while I was recovering. My son stood. "I think it's time you leave." The room spun. Every picture hanging on those walls, every scratch on the hardwood floor, every flower in the garden outside. I knew where each one came from, because I had built every piece of this life. Yet somehow, I was suddenly a guest inside it. I slowly placed the serving tray onto the table. The plates rattled softly. No one moved. No one breathed. I looked around one last time, at the family portraits, at my late husband's photograph over the fireplace, at the staircase where my son had once sat crying after his first heartbreak. Then I looked back at the man standing before me. "I hope," I said quietly, "you never discover what it feels like to become a stranger inside your own home." He folded his arms. "I'll take that risk." I nodded once. Then I walked toward the front door. Nobody followed me. Nobody stopped me. But as my hand touched the doorknob, I noticed something. A framed photograph had disappeared from the hallway. The only photograph showing me standing beside my husband on the day we purchased this estate. Someone hadn't simply thrown me out. They were already trying to erase me. And that changed everything. Rain began falling before I reached the driveway. Not heavy, just enough to soak my sweater before I made it to my old sedan. I sat behind the steering wheel, but couldn't bring myself to start the engine. 28 years. That house had held 28 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, hospital recoveries, anniversaries, arguments, laughter, goodbyes. Now I'd been removed from it in less than 5 minutes. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, not because I wanted to cry, because I refused to. Crying would make this feel final, and something deep inside me refused to believe it was. Across the lawn, I could still see the dining room windows glowing warmly. Inside. They continued eating, my dinner, using my dishes, inside my home, as though nothing had happened. I almost laughed, not from amusement, from disbelief. The phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I ignored those. Tonight, I answered. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes, this is David Lawson. The name sounded familiar. I'm with Hamilton and Briggs, a law firm. I've been trying to reach you all week. I've had other things going on, I imagine. His pause felt deliberate. I think we should meet. I'm not exactly in the mood. This concerns your husband's estate. That made me sit upright. My husband passed away 11 years ago. I know. Then why now? Another pause. Because someone recently tried to move $50 million. Every muscle in my body froze. I'm sorry. I can't discuss this over the phone. I don't have $50 million. No, you don't. But your late husband did. The rain suddenly sounded louder. What are you saying? I'm saying, his voice lowered. Someone thinks they've inherited something that legally doesn't belong to them. The call ended 10 minutes later. I never turned the key. Instead, I watched the lights inside that house. My son laughed. Even through the rain, I could see him raising another toast. He looked victorious, confident, certain the game was already over. Poor Daniel. He'd forgotten something. His father had always handled money, but I had always handled secrets. The next morning, I drove to a small motel 30 miles away. It smelled faintly of old coffee and fresh paint. The receptionist recognized me from local charity events. She pretended not to. For that, I silently thanked her. Room 214 overlooked a highway instead of gardens. The mattress squeaked. The coffee tasted like burnt cardboard. It was perfect. Nobody would think to look for me there. At exactly 9 o'clock, David Lawson walked through the lobby. Grey suit, leather briefcase, calm eyes. He looked like the kind of attorney who preferred facts over feelings. After introductions, he placed 3 folders on the small motel table. Mrs. Whitmore. He slid the first folder toward me. I believe your son has committed several crimes. I blinked. Excuse me? He opened the folder. Inside were copies of trust amendments, property transfers, corporate filings, bank authorizations. Most carried my signature, or something that looked disturbingly close to it. I didn't sign these. I know. You know. He nodded. We've already had them examined. He pushed another document toward me. The signatures are excellent. I swallowed. But they aren't yours. Silence filled the room. Then he opened the second folder. This is what your son believes he inherited. The pages listed companies, properties, investment accounts, luxury holdings. Everything totaled nearly $23 million. I looked up. That's impossible. It is. He smiled slightly, because that's only the part he knows about. He reached for the final folder. Unlike the others, it wasn't labeled. Its edges looked old, almost untouched. He rested one hand on top of it. Your husband instructed us never to open this unless one specific condition was met. What condition? He looked directly into my eyes. If your children ever attempted to remove you from your own home. A chill raced down my spine. My husband had planned for this. David slowly opened the folder. Inside lay a single handwritten letter. My husband's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The first line blurred through sudden tears. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, our greatest fear has finally come true. My hands trembled as I unfolded the yellowed pages. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, exactly like the drawer in my husband's old study where he kept every important document. I hadn't smelled that scent in over a decade. For one impossible moment, it felt as though he was sitting across from me again. David quietly stood. I'll wait outside. The motel door clicked shut, leaving me alone. Just me. and the voice of the man I'd loved for 42 years. Evelyn, if fate has brought this letter into your hands, then our son has become exactly the kind of man I prayed he never would. I hope I'm wrong, but if I'm right, promise me one thing. Don't fight with anger. Fight with patience. Because impatient people make mistakes. Greedy people make even bigger ones. A tear landed on the page. I wiped it away quickly. He hated when I cried over paperwork. Then I turned the page, and what I read next made my heart stop, because hidden behind the family fortune, there was another fortune, one no one, not even Daniel, knew existed, and that secret was worth more than $50 million. I read the next page 3 times before my mind accepted the words. Your father always said money changes people. I disagreed. Money doesn't change people. It simply introduces them. If Daniel has forced you to open this letter, then he has already shown you who he truly is. Now it's time you learn what I never told anyone. Not even him, I frowned. My husband had always been transparent with me. Or so I believed. The next sentence shattered that belief. 40 years ago, before we bought the estate, I became an early investor in a small aerospace company with 3 retired military engineers. I almost laughed. He'd mentioned a failed investment once. He'd said they lost nearly everything. Apparently, that wasn't the whole story. The company survived. It changed names 3 times, merged twice, expanded overseas. Eventually it became a defense technology corporation supplying governments across Europe and North America. I stared at the attached financial statements. My husband had never sold his original shares. After decades of splits, mergers, dividends, and appreciation, those forgotten shares were now worth just over $52 million. I whispered his name. Richard. How had he kept something this enormous hidden? The answer waited on the next page. Because I never trusted inheritance, only character. If our children grew into kind people, I intended to tell them together when we turned 70. If they grew greedy, they would never receive $1. Instead, the choice would belong entirely to you. I closed my eyes. Outside, trucks rumbled past the motel. Inside, everything became painfully quiet. The house, the humiliation, the forged signatures, the missing family photographs. None of it had happened because Daniel needed a place to live. It happened because he thought he'd already found the treasure. He had robbed the wrong vault. David returned a few minutes later. One look at my face told him I'd finished reading. So, he asked carefully, what would you like to do? I looked at the folders. I want the truth. You'll have it. No. I met his eyes. I want all of it. For the first time since we'd met, the lawyer smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. He opened his briefcase. More folders, more documents, more lies. We've spent 6 months investigating. I blinked. 6 months. We became suspicious after your son attempted to accelerate several trust distributions that legally couldn't be accessed. He tried before, 3 separate times. Every answer created 2 new questions. He wasn't alone. David slid several photographs across the table. One showed Daniel entering a downtown office building. Another showed his wife. A third made my stomach twist. Standing beside them was my financial advisor, Harold Benson, the man who had handled my investments for nearly 20 years. No, I whispered. He wouldn't. David's expression remained unchanged. He did. The next photograph showed Harold entering the county records office. The one after that, a private bank, then another law office. They've been preparing this for almost 18 months. 18 months. That meant long before my surgery, long before the paperwork, long before Daniel began insisting I slow down, long before he convinced me to let Harold organize all my documents. None of it had been kindness. It had been preparation. Suddenly, every conversation from the past 2 years sounded different inside my memory. "Mum, let me handle the bills." "You shouldn't stress yourself. Sign here. It's only routine. Trust me, trust me." The cruelest lies always arrive wearing familiar faces. That evening, I rented a tiny storage unit across town. Inside were boxes I'd packed after Richard died. Boxes I hadn't opened in years, old tax returns, military awards, family albums, receipts, diaries. For hours I searched. Then I found it. A leather notebook. Richard's handwriting covered every page, not journal entries, records, dates, meetings, business notes, names. One name appeared repeatedly: Harold Benson. My chest tightened. The earliest entry dated back 15 years. Harold asked detailed questions about succession. Didn't like his interest. Another. Told Harold family assets are not what they appear to be. He kept pressing. Mistake? Another. 3 years later. Need to update contingency plan. Harold knows too much. I looked up from the notebook. The room suddenly felt smaller. Richard hadn't trusted Harold. He had simply never told me. The final entry was written just weeks before my husband passed away. If anything happens to me unexpectedly, watch Harold, not because he's smarter than us, because greedy men become predictable. I slowly closed the notebook. Greedy men. Richard had been studying people far longer than I realized, and now his notes were becoming my roadmap. The following morning, David introduced me to someone new, a woman in her early 60s, short silver hair, navy blazer, steady eyes. "This is Margaret Ellis." I recognized the name immediately, one of the state's most respected forensic accountants, the kind corporations feared. She shook my hand firmly. "I've already started following the money." "What have you found?" She spread a digital map across the conference table. Colored lines connected companies' trusts, banks, investment firms, property LLCs. It looked like a spider web. Daniel wasn't just stealing from me. He was hiding where the money would go afterward. These shell companies, Margaret pointed to 3 names, were created within weeks of your surgery. By Daniel? No, she circled another name. By his wife. I wasn't surprised, not anymore. What about Harold? Margaret zoomed into another section. There. Harold owned small percentages in every company. Never enough to attract attention. Always enough to profit. Professional, patient, calculated. They hadn't acted emotionally. They'd built an entire machine, one designed to slowly erase me, but every machine leaves tracks. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Daniel. For the first time since he threw me out, I let it ring. Then voicemail. "Mum." His voice sounded softer. "I think things got out of hand." Interesting. Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," just "things got out of hand." He continued, "Emily feels terrible." A lie. "I'd like us to talk." Another lie. "We can fix this." The biggest lie of all. David looked at me. "Will you answer?" I smiled. "No." "Why?" "Because desperate people reveal more when they think they're losing." I placed the phone face down. 5 minutes later, it rang again. This time it wasn't Daniel, it was my grandson. "Grandma!" His tiny voice almost broke me. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you coming home?" I closed my eyes. "I don't know." "Dad says you left because you were angry." Silence. Children repeat what they're taught, but they also notice what adults miss. After a pause, he whispered, "I don't think that's true." A tear escaped before I could stop it. "No," I said softly. "It isn't." Then he asked the question I wasn't prepared for. Grandma. Why did Dad take Grandpa's picture down? My heart stopped. What? The big one. The one where you were both smiling. He threw it in the garage. I couldn't speak, because suddenly, the missing photograph wasn't just a decoration. It was evidence. Someone wanted to erase every reminder that Richard had built that home, because memories complicate lies. That evening, Margaret burst into the conference room without knocking. I found it. David stood immediately. What? The trigger. She dropped a thick file onto the table. Daniel isn't after your estate. I frowned. He already has the house. No. She shook her head. The house was never the objective. She turned one page, then another, finally stopping at a corporate acquisition proposal, a private investment group, an anonymous buyer. Purchase price, $187 million. I stared. What is this? David answered quietly. The land beneath your estate. My pulse quickened. Our home isn't worth that. The house isn't. He tapped the document. But the mineral rights underneath it are. Silence swallowed the room. Oil, natural gas, rare earth elements. A recent geological survey suggested there could be billions beneath the county. And someone already knew. Daniel hadn't forced me out because he wanted my home. He had forced me out because someone had promised him a fortune if he could gain legal control before the discovery became public. Every humiliation, every forged signature, every fake smile, every carefully planned betrayal had been building toward this. I looked through the motel window into the darkening sky. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about war. Because my son had just made one catastrophic mistake. He believed I was running. He had no idea. I had already started surrounding him. War isn't won by striking first. It's won by making your enemy believe they've already won. 3 days later, I finally returned Daniel's call. He answered before the first ring had finished. Mom. His voice carried relief. I knew you'd come around. I let the silence stretch. I'd like to come home. Of course. You can stay in the guest suite until we sort everything out. Guest suite. The same house where I'd once slept beside my husband for 43 years. I smiled to myself. I appreciate that. We've all said things we regret. Not I regret. We regret. He still couldn't admit what he'd done. Can we have dinner tomorrow? He asked. I think that's a wonderful idea. The following evening, every seat around my dining table was occupied once again. Daniel, his wife Emily, Harold Benson, 2 attorneys they had hired, even a representative from the investment company hoping to purchase the property. Interesting. They had become overconfident. People get careless when they think the finish line is in sight. Daniel stood and raised his wine glass. I'm glad our family could resolve this peacefully. I almost laughed. Peacefully. He had thrown his 72-year-old mother out of her own home. Now he wanted applause because he'd invited me back for dinner. I agree, I said softly. I think tonight will resolve everything. He smiled. So? Have you decided to sign? I looked around the room. Every face watched me, waiting, expecting surrender. Instead, I reached into my handbag, not for a pen, for a small black remote. I pressed one button. The television above the fireplace flickered to life. Emily frowned. Daniel turned around. Harold's smile disappeared instantly. Security footage filled the screen. Date stamps, timestamps, video after video. Daniel entering my study while I recovered from surgery. Harold photographing confidential files. Emily removing documents from my safe. Another recording. Daniel practicing my signature again and again. Until it looked almost perfect. Nobody spoke. The room had become so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, Tick, tick. Daniel slowly stood. Where did you get this? I installed cameras after your father passed away. I hadn't. McKenna and Margaret had installed them only weeks earlier, but they didn't need to know that. What matters, I continued, is that every lie eventually leaves fingerprints. Harold abruptly stood. This meeting is over. He reached for his briefcase. The front door opened before he could take a second step. 2 detectives walked inside, followed by uniformed deputies, then another familiar face, David Lawson. He calmly placed several envelopes on the dining table. Court orders, one by one, asset freeze, fraud investigation, forgery charges, civil injunctions, emergency trust suspension. Daniel looked as though the air had vanished from the room. Emily's wineglass slipped from her fingers. It shattered across the hardwood floor. Nobody moved to clean it. The lead detective unfolded a warrant. Daniel Whitmore. We're investigating multiple counts of financial fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted theft. Daniel stared at me. You called the police? No, I answered calmly. You called them. What? The moment you forged my signature. The detective asked Harold to surrender his phone. He refused. That lasted exactly 5 seconds. Another officer removed a laptop from Emily's purse. Margaret quietly whispered to David, "That's the one." Inside that laptop, every fake company, every hidden transaction, every deleted email, everything. Harold suddenly looked 20 years older. He sat back down, defeated. I can explain. No, David answered. You can't. The representative from the investment company slowly stood. I think we'll excuse ourselves. You should stay, I said. He looked confused. Why? Because you're about to discover you were negotiating with people who never owned this property. He frowned. What do you mean? David opened Richard's final trust. The estate transferred into an irrevocable family preservation trust 11 years ago. The representative blinked. So Daniel couldn't legally sell a single square foot. Silence. And neither could anyone else. The man slowly sat back down. He wasn't angry. He was horrified. His company had spent almost 2 years negotiating a deal that legally never existed. Daniel finally exploded. You planned this? No, I said quietly. Your father did. I slid Richard's letter across the table. Daniel picked it up. His hands trembled. As he read, his face slowly changed. Confusion, disbelief, regret. Then something I'd never seen before. Shame. He reached the final paragraph. If you're reading this, son, you chose money over family. Your mother deserves better than that. If you cannot honor the woman who sacrificed everything for you, you deserve nothing I built. Daniel lowered the letter. His shoulders collapsed. For the first time since Richard's funeral, he looked like a little boy again. People imagine revenge as screaming, destroying, humiliating. They are usually wrong. The greatest revenge is making someone live with the truth. 3 months later, the criminal cases were still unfolding. Harold accepted a plea agreement. Emily quietly filed for divorce after discovering Daniel had hidden millions from her as well. The investment company withdrew completely. Every fraudulent transfer was reversed. The house returned to me exactly as it had always been, except it didn't feel the same, because I wasn't the same woman who had walked out that front door. One autumn morning, David visited with a final folder. The last document. I smiled. What now? He handed it to me. Inside was control of Richard's hidden investment, $52 million, legally, entirely mine. What will you do with it? He asked. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but scars aren't signs of weakness. They're proof you survived. The greatest inheritance Richard ever left me wasn't $52 million. It was the wisdom to know that dignity cannot be forged, Love cannot be stolen, and a home is never defined by the name on its deed,